Spider-Man is directed by Sam Raimi and stars Tobey Maguire, James Franco, Kristen Dunst, Willem Dafoe, Rosemary Harris, and a bunch of other people, and tells the story of young Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire, and his life as an awkward, nerdy boy in high school who gets bitten by a radioactive spider in a school field trip, and that radioactive spider gives him spider powers. He starts discovering his abilities, he starts learning new things about himself, and once the tragedy of Uncle Ben happens in his life, he takes up the mantle completely as Spider-Man and goes about his day trying to do the right thing and save as many people as he can in New York, all while the Green Goblin is up and rising and is causing havoc and he has to stop him. This film was a childhood favorite of mine. I cannot tell you how many times I have watched the DVD, the original DVD of Spider-Man. Spider-Man was a big thing in my life. I remember playing some video game based on the third film as a kid. I remember loving the Green Goblin so much. I remember this film being completely scratched up a bit when I was a kid and I ruined all my DVDs. I was Spider-Man multiple times during Halloween as a little kid. I was a Black City Spider-Man one time, I remember vividly. Spider-Man was a huge deal to me, and this first movie was very much a huge deal to me, and was my first introduction to the character and the world that he inhabits. Now rewatching it over the past few years, I have come to be more critical of the time for movies in general, and still, I think this film holds up very well. Now, the special effects are dodgy. Some dialogue here is pretty dated, if you want to ask me, especially for Sam Raimi. But for the most part, I still find myself very much invested in this awkward kid's life as a teenage superhero and the antics he gets into. And while the film can get serious and touching at moments, and those moments hit very hard, I still think that this is one of the most silliest superhero films I've seen in a while. And I thought that it was one of the more serious ones as a kid, so that's saying something. Tobey Maguire is great as Peter Parker. That is without saying now at this point. He is the original, he is the classic, but he does bring a sense of awkwardness to the role that you don't see as much in either Tom Holland's or Andrew Garfield's portrayal. He captures that aspect of Peter Parker very perfectly. In Spider-Man, he does a really good job. Though I can understand some being disappointed about his portrayal as Spider-Man because it's not like exactly as Spider-Man in the comics. But for me, I still think his Spider-Man works very well. He's not the most quippiest, but his character as Peter Parker carries this entire movie. And his journey from the beginning when he is a nerdy teen to being pretty vengeful to then just wanting to try and do the right thing, I thought it was handled perfectly and is exactly what I wanted from the first origin story of Peter Parker. And the way they handled the Uncle Ben speech, with great power comes great responsibility, before he died, works very well because you get to see Uncle Ben, his relationship with Peter and Aunt May, get to see their dynamics. You could tell that they care for one another despite the limited screen time. Uncle Ben was great in the movie, and Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, she gets better over the movies, but here she still does a really good job, though she does feel sort of like a background character at times, and is only there if the movie doesn't have any other characters for Peter Parker to interact with, it seems like. But for me, she still worked. Kristen Dunst as Mary Jane, a lot of people criticize her, and kind of warrantly. Mostly in the sequel, I have a problem with her, but here, she plays a role pretty well, though I still think she gets a very lackluster characterization at times, and she can come off as sort of a cheater if you could tell if you pay attention to the film. She gets on with Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Harry Osborn all at the same time. It's hard not to think about it. But her performance is pretty good. Just her character could have been written better, I guess. Harry Osborn, portrayed by James Franco, is really good in the film. I bought his relationship with Peter, and I understood why they would be best friends, as he kind of resents his father, who's wealthy. You would think that him being the son of a wealthy man, he would have a lot of other friends, but he just wants to stick out for Peter, who is probably the least liked kid in school. And that says a lot about his character. Just his interactions with him, just him being friends with him, just tells you a lot about Harry Osborn as a character and what kind of person he is. And you could tell that because of that, Norman Osborn was a little disappointed until he meets Peter, and you can understand that resentment he had towards his father, which we'll get into Willem Dafoe now. Willem Dafoe is the Green Goblin. He is perfect casting. I cannot imagine anybody else playing this character. Even if it was supposed to be makeup and prosthetics originally, he still would have killed it in the role. I loved his mannerisms. I love his thing where he is sort of like two split personalities. Like one personality is the actual Goblin and the other just normal Norman Osborn. It was portrayed very well. And while it can get hammy at times, it what adds in the fun flavor for this film and this villain. You understand the motivations and everything. He wants to save his business and he goes crazy after a failed experiment, which as a kid kind of terrified me. But overall, his inclusion and his performance is crazy, but it is downright insanely hilarious. I love it. To me, Willem Dafoe killed it as a Goblin. And in terms of storytelling perspective, I think he was the perfect villain to choose for this movie. Because you're introducing all the other characters, Mary Jane and Harry Osborn most of all, and you want someone personal connected to Peter. And who's the most personal than your best friend's dad? That is a good choice of a villain to start off with. And he is basically the Joker to the Spider-Man's Joker, if you know what I'm trying to say. The cast were great. Sam Raimi's directing was great. Though I think he came into more of his own in his second film. You could tell a lot of his personality is still here. The scene in which, as I said, Norman turned into the Goblin scared me as a kid. It reminded me a lot of Evil Dead. The moments where he's able to take time with the characters as they interact with one another, like MJ talked to Peter in the backyard. I thought all that was very good, because also the movie does something that not a lot of other superhero movies do, especially now today, is that they take a lot of downtime with the characters, with them interacting with one another, getting to know each other. That's where the story held strong most of all, and you can tell that's where the passion goes, because that all helps the character of Peter Parker grow by seeing him interact with other people and starting to make friends or enemies. It's what helped this film in my opinion, kept its momentum despite some of its dated moments or problems. And overall, the action, I have to say, was helmed very well. There's a lot of cool shots, especially in the final act, in which it does get bloody and dirty. I love how serious the film can get at times. It was able to portray Spider-Man in a serious way, in which it still also kind of feels ridiculous also, but it was never handled poorly in my opinion, or unintentionally, or it's supposed to be unintentionally funny. It all felt serious, it all felt grounded. Not serious in the way it's The Dark Knight, but in the way it's helmed, it felt like it was done professionally, if you know what I'm saying. So overall, this film holds up very well. The story was great, the pacing was great, the directing was great, the cast was great, all the major stuff was great. A few dated jokes and elements here and there, a few spotty CGI effects. Overall, cannot take away from my enjoyment for this film, and I'm going to give Spider-Man an A-. Not a perfect film, but it's a childhood favorite of mine, and in my opinion, it still holds up very well to this day. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys next time.